Our next speaker is Andy McMinn. Andy's got a background in engineering and a few years ago moved over to the NHS, which I think he'll agree was a bit of a culture shock at the time. Since that time, Andy's had a meteoric rise through the ranks to become head of procurement and logistics, I think partly because everybody was running in the opposite direction as well. But I'd like you to welcome Andy McMinn to the stage to talk about how he's applied NLP in his procurement role within the NHS. So, Andy, please.
Hope you can hear me. As a true engineer, I've actually broken my little sound box, so only the back of it, I think. I'll apologise now if I have to keep bending down to drink some water. I got really bad food poisoning yesterday, and I've spent a few hours staring down a toilet last night. So, right, clicker, right. Good morning. My name is Andrew McMinn, Head of Procurement at Plymouth Hospitals NHS Trust. As Martin said, I have a background in engineering, quality engineering, supply chain engineering. Prior to moving to the NHS, I worked in international supply chain management. Spent a lot of time in China, America. Was taught a great deal about Lean and Six Sigma and business change models. And picking up on the theme of today that Martin emphasised at the start, it's about change. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is my own personal story of change. And it's a reflection of the last 4 years of my life. 4 years ago when I moved into the NHS and the experiences I had at that time. So I'm going to, I think it's really important that I give you some context, so a bit about procurement in the NHS, the challenges it faces, the difficulties it has, and I'll demonstrate the reasons for and how I became aware that I needed to improve how I communicate with not only people that I work with, but also internally with myself. We'll then go on to look at some of the tools and techniques that I've used and now, having reflected upon those 4 years, now recognise are things that work for me. We'll look at some examples of metaphor and sensory language, and then finally talk about the results that I've seen personally, my team has, and the identity of my team as it is today and where it's come from. So, war, such a hard word. Notice as you look at that word, maybe the images that come into your head, the sounds that you might hear, how it makes you feel. Because I did, on the day that I was given an email by a colleague. The colleague at that time was my boss, the predecessor, the previous head of procurement that I took over from. And he'd given me an email, and it was from a consultant surgeon, a particularly prickly, vocal, and challenging consultant surgeon. And the email I was given was a copy of an email from this person. And in the email, it said to my colleague, "This is war." And that was the only word I could focus on. And the reason I've been given this email was because I was just about to embark on a project, probably the biggest project I'd started, because I'd only been there a few months. And this was the guy I was just about to work with. And he declared war on my department. And I just could not get my head around that. Having come from the private sector where procurement was a strategic function, to now moving to the NHS where it wasn't. So I wanted to understand why were our clients in procurement declaring war on us? So a bit about procurement in the NHS. It's a subservient function. I don't heal people. My team don't heal people. We facilitate the healing of people. Procurement's got quite a weak identity. We are a back office function. We can be seen and viewed by clinicians and our customers as bureaucrats. We're a process. We slow down and hamper progress. Things that we do, we spend public money. Things that we do sometimes take a length of time because there are legal reasons and rules that we must follow. And that all fosters this perception of our role in the organisation as maybe not adding value. It also suffers from what I've termed myself the Officer Crabtree syndrome. For those old enough in the room to remember, hello, and good morning. Officer Crabtree always found it difficult to get over what he was trying to say. He struggled with his French or his pidgin English. And procurement suffers a similar problem or a similar challenge. The language we tend to use in procurement is very technical, full of business acronyms, abstract language, lean, RFQ, RFP, OJU, law, etc. It's mixed with a lot of hard language, what we'll come on to later, which Milton describes as modal operators of possibility and necessity. So it's the use of words like have to, must, can't. And when you blend technical language with hard language, this tends to be the expression you see on the people that you're talking to. The word puzzled is etched upon their face. And procurement in the NHS is very much a mysterious dark art. Its purpose is unclear. There's almost a Jedi mystique about it. Maybe not a Jedi so much, maybe more Darth Vader-ish. You all know he was a Jedi as well. So very much a dark, mysterious art. And a question I frequently hear is, Andy, what is it that procurement do? And every time I hear it, I wince in a similar way to when somebody asked me, what is NLP? It's difficult to describe. So, when I reflected for this presentation on what I was actually doing at that time, my communication strategies. So when I would go to meet a clinician, a client, etc., I'd go and sit with them, really not focus on what I was going to do at that time. I'd just sit there and listen and hear their problems, things, their requests, what they wanted me to do. Sometimes I wouldn't be listening. I would be thinking about what I was going to say once they'd finished talking. So I wasn't really giving them the respect. Once they'd finished talking, I'd respond with the hard technical language that I previously described. So complex procurement language that meant a great deal to me, but very little to them. Using, no, you can't have that. We must do it this way. This is public money. And the client would generally not respond, probably dig their heels in, shutters would go up, massive resistance. And we'd go back to the start again. So he or she would repeat probably the same words and phrases that they'd just spoken, the same problems and issues that they had. And I would again respond with the same hard technical language that was previously unsuccessful. And what this meant for everybody involved in the communication was literally tearing your hair out. Luckily, I've got plenty of hair, nice thick hair, so my scalp could take it. Other people, maybe Martin, probably couldn't. Also, for my personal state, and probably the state of others, I have a history of blood pressure. Sorry, say that again. I hope everybody's got a history of blood pressure in their family. I've got a history of high blood pressure in my family. And at that time, I got this image off Google. I was just looking for an image of Google, and that was my actual heart rate at that time, my blood pressure at that time, 140/88, bordering on needing drugs to help me control it. So, as far as the communication goes, me communicating with myself, because that's internal dialogue, communicating with clients, communicating with my team. There was this frustrating loop of conversation. There would be some successes and some failures, more failures than successes. And I don't know how many people have read Joseph O'Connor's book. I think it's NLP at Work. It's the blue one, dark blue one. It was the first day of business practitioner course that I did with Evolution, and I went out to change the parking ticket on my car before those little nasty men with their black and yellow caps came out and gave me a parking ticket. And I was sat in the car because I wanted to wait 15 minutes, so I only had to put one more ticket on to go back in for it. And somebody, I can't remember who it was, had told me about this fantastic book. And I was sat there, and it literally, no word of a lie, it fell open at this page. And I was just picking it up to kill 15 minutes. And this was the quote that I read. I think it's page 131. That's the digital side of me coming up there. And this was the quote I read. And it really was a light bulb moment in my life. It is such an important moment in my life, and something I will always be grateful for reading. It seems so simple. Going back to the process about me talking in hard technical language, I was just talking in the wrong language. It was English, but the clinician didn't understand that, or the client didn't understand that. It sounds so simple. All I had to do was change the words. And it was a punch the air moment. And I realized at that point that I'd moved to the second stage of learning. I was conscious incompetent. I knew I was shit at communicating. And I felt brilliant. I am really bad at communicating. And I think it was after the end of the day, then the massive come down hit me. Bang! I'm shit at communicating, I'm leading a team, and I ain't got a clue what to do about it. Fortunately, that was my first course of NLP. And through the last 4 years, I've now learned how to improve my communication. I then, being an engineer, a process engineer, a practical person, I knew just changing the words wasn't enough. I had to look at the methods of how I communicate. So I'm going to send that to Joseph O'Connor to put in his next book because he'd missed something. So that is what I focused on. And I have an engineering background. I did an engineering apprenticeship. I'm a practical person. I like doing DIY. I like planning, deconstructing, building things, looking how things work, reverse engineering. So in the same way that I would approach a bit of mechanical tooling, building a new product, building processes and world-class processes with Six Sigma, this is how I set about improving my communication. The first three are, this model is split into language patterns and methods, and the first three are language patterns. So sensory language you'll hear a great deal about today. Neil's got an absolutely fantastic presentation that explains this in far better than I can. But we all know that we process the information that we take in through our senses, so visual, kinesthetic, auditory, and gustatory and taste. Not so much the last two, but the sensory language, the visual, kinesthetic, and auditory. It would seem obvious that if we can talk in a language that appeals to those senses, then you will capture and inspire most of the people that you communicate with. I'm very visual preference, and from working with a lovely lady in this group, and I won't point her out, she introduced me to the kinesthetic side that I was weak in, and she's smiling now as I'm looking at her. And I'll be ever so grateful for her for that. So I'm now aware what are my my weaknesses on sensory language. Milton meta model, chunking up, chunking down. I mean, Nick briefly spoke about that. Metaphor, you could argue it could be a method, but I've left it in as a language pattern as well, and we'll come on to metaphor in a minute. Then these are some of the methods, not all of them, that I use. Sensory presentations. I'd like to think my presentation today is a good example of a sensory presentation, appealing to those visual, kinesthetic, and auditory senses. Embedded commands, tag questions. Embedded commands, I'll show an example of one of those in a moment. But I really emphasize the bottom one, fun. You can have so much fun with this, fun with the groups. You can induce laughter in groups and positive states in the teams you're working in. And I've had so much fun with this. This has been the best time of my life for the last 4 years, practicing and playing around with these things. And I encourage you all, just try things out. If it doesn't work, you know it doesn't work, try something different. And I think that builds on from the theme of the strategy I was running at that time. And I was going to use it, as I said, in my presentation, but Nick has already used it, because it was Nick who taught me it, about this, if you've only got a hammer in your toolbox. All this has increased my flexibility, my choices, and as a leader of 48 staff and with 6,000 users, I need to be able to switch styles, situational leadership. This is what this has given me, flexibility. So, some examples. These two sentences took me about 2 hours to construct, and you wouldn't believe it would take that long to build 2 sentences. This was something I used to a group of team in work, so people in work, so a mixture of clinicians, nurses, and staff that work for me, logistics staff. And it was at the end of an introductory training on lean. So if we break this down now and deconstruct it, well, I'll read the sentence in entirety. Now I want each person to gather up and take with you all that you have heard and learned. Because as we look ahead towards the long weeks and months working on this tough project, new knowledge will make life easy for you. So as we break that apart now, the first sentence, now I want each person to gather up and take with you all that you have heard and learned. It's a message to the conscious and unconscious at that time. It implies you have learned something. To gather means there's probably a lot there. Make sure you pick it up. Don't drop anything. Take it with you. If we look at the sentence, the comma from new knowledge will make life easy for you. I don't know if you noticed when I spoke it, up until the comma, the language was quite bright and upbeat. And then I paused and then shifted the tone down for the new knowledge will make life easy for you. And that's marking out a separate command, and that command was to the unconscious. I wanted them to know that it wasn't just what they learned today, because I've got other training modules coming in the future. But a difficult time was we were just about to embark on a really important, difficult project, and I knew people were quite in fear of what was coming. But what I told them there was, the new knowledge they'd learned today and what they will learn in the future will make life easy for them. I talked about sensory language previously, and there's some sensory words. Gather, kinesthetic word. Look, visual. Heard, auditory. Tough, kinesthetic. This is something I was not aware of before. I would have just talked in paint a picture vividly, a landscape, all visual words. And the kinesthetic people that I know, one sat very close to me, it would mean it would turn them off. It wouldn't inspire them. It wouldn't engage with them. And the last one, I don't know if anybody can spot the kinesthetic metaphor there somewhere in the paragraph, and that's the gather. To gather up and take with you the learning. Now, if somebody said to me 4 years ago that I would spend 2 hours writing 2 sentences, I would have said at that time, you are nuts, really. But I do, and I spend hours playing around with things like this. But please do, because the results I see are staggering with the teams and the groups that I work with. Metaphor, my absolute favourite subject. I love metaphor. I wanted to get a t-shirt for today with a heart on that said, I love metaphor. I'm not ashamed of saying that, and some people find that quite amusing. But just to check you're all awake, this was for that same lean course. I wanted to get the group to think differently, to try and come up with what lean was on their own. Because I'm a believer in the statement, especially in the NHS, a prophet in his own land is never listened to. And I'm conscious that when I go out talking this message, people don't really listen. The NHS is really good at spending hundreds of thousands of pounds. There's no NHS in here, is there? With consultants who are brought in to tell you what you already know. So I try to get other people to say what I want and the ideas, and to communicate the ideas that I have. So to check you're all awake, and it's good for my future training as well, can you just throw at me what comes to mind when you see that image?